Today, and we're going to start with last night's debate. There's one moment that has a lot of you weighing in on social media tonight. Take a look at this.
Would he close down the oil industry? Would you close down the oil industry?
By the way, I would transition from the oil industry, yes.
Oh,
I will
that's
transition.
a big statement.
It is a big statement.
That's a
because
big statement.
I would stop.
Why would you do that?
Because the oil industry pollutes significantly.
Wow, when I heard that, I'm going, did he really need to go there? Former Vice President Joe Biden there taking a hard stance on the future of oil in this country. He says he would stop giving money to the oil and gas industry. Question is, will that comment hurt him come election day in major swing states like Ohio and Pennsylvania? Joining us right now, Mark Z. Jacobson. He's a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Stanford University and author of 100% Clean Renewable Energy and Storage for Everything. I'm also joined by Joel Griffith. He's research fellow at the Institute for Economic Freedom and Opportunity at the Heritage Foundation. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Joel, I want to start with you. What did you make of what the president said and when he said it at that last debate?
Well, what happened last night, the discussion over the future of fossil fuels may have been the most important part of that debate. Republicans, Democrats, whoever you are, if you're an American, you want access to reliable, affordable, abundant energy. And we've seen that over the years. Thanks to natural gas fracking, we have some of the most affordable energy prices in the world. Our prices here compared to what's going on in Europe, it's a fraction of what they're paying. And on top of that, we have led the world in terms of carbon reductions, and that's in large part thanks to clean natural gas. What Vice President Biden is proposing with basically his Green New Deal would be an enormous tax hike on American taxpayers. You're talking to the tune of $165,000 per family over a 10-year period. That's a cost that Americans don't want to pay. It's going to lead to higher travel costs, higher food costs. Really everything that we engage in our life involves energy. That would levy an enormous burden on taxpayers, and there would be almost no environmental impact as a result. But I'll tell you what, there's going to be a lot of cronyist business interests that stand to benefit enormously if this plan comes to fruition.
Joel, what do you think? Get in there, weigh in.
Oh, you mean Mark? So,
yeah.
I completely disagree. It's actually more expensive to maintain the current fossil fuel energy infrastructure. If you actually electrify all energy in the United States and transition that electricity or provide that electricity with wind and water and solar power, you'd actually reduce energy demand by about 57 to 59% due to the efficiency of electricity over combustion, the efficiency of electric vehicles over internal combustion engine vehicles, the efficiency of heat pumps over gas heaters and oil and other types of heating. And there's also wind and solar are now the cheapest forms of electricity, not only in the US, but worldwide. Lazard's cost of energy 2020 just came out, and onshore wind and utility scale solar are about half the cost of natural gas. So in fact, if we transition the entire United States to clean renewable energy, which is basically the Green New Deal, the US would save, consumers would save huge amounts of money. Instead of paying like $2.1 trillion a year for all energy in the United States by 2050, we'd be paying about $770 billion, which is about the size of the military budget. So we're saving energy costs 64%. In addition, we would reduce health costs significantly because it said between around 63 to 78,000 people die from air pollution each year in the United States alone, and about 7 million worldwide. And about 5,000 of those deaths are due to natural gas. So we'd eliminate those costs. We'd eliminate global warming emissions from natural gas and coal and oil. So there's only a net benefit, and we create 3 million more net long-term full-time jobs than lost.
Let me ask you both to try to politically handicap what the former vice president said last night. On the one hand, we're talking jobs, and I'm sure that's what the president, was aiming at when he called out the states, Texas, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and the others, all swing states, by the way, not Texas so much. Could it cost Biden politically, or is his lead is such, and do we have enough people who are pro-environment that they'll outweigh any negative impact at the polls on November 3rd?
Well, I think the political impact depends in part about to what extent people understand what is going on elsewhere in terms of these types of energy policies. We have a really good test case here in the United States. It's called the state of California. In California, due to the renewable energy mandates and carbon emission reduction mandates, people are paying 2 to 3 times more for energy, both for the residential use, for the gasoline for the cars, and also for industrial production than they are elsewhere in the United States. That is a tax impact that can exceed well over a few $1,000s per family. Second of all, we know what this looks like because it's happening in Europe. In places like Germany, they've already implemented their version of this Green New Deal. And guess what? In Germany, they're paying a multiple for their electricity costs relative to the United States. And that's a big part of the reason why the typical family in the United States has $10,000 more per year in disposable income. It's in large part because our energy costs are so much more affordable. The Biden plan, without a doubt, would be an enormous tax hike on the American people. And it's something that most people, if they understand it, will reject that type of a proposal.
Mark, you got the last word.
Yeah, I disagree entirely. There's such a benefit of transitioning. In California, the energy, it has nothing to do, we don't have enough renewable energy, and that's the only reason there has been shortage, like blackouts, is because not enough renewable energy, not enough offshore wind. We don't have offshore wind yet. If we had offshore wind, we would meet the peaks in demand in the evenings. Right now, we're meeting them during the day because of this growth in solar. But we need more offshore wind for and then battery storage and all sorts of other types of storage, heat storage, cold storage, electricity storage. In Germany, there's much more benefit than it's not just the electricity sector. If you look at the overall economy, the energy economy, it's been a huge benefit, not only the production of new renewable energy sources, but also jobs and higher tax revenues. So if you look at everything, Germany's had a huge benefit from transitioning towards renewable energy.
Okay, Mark, Joel, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Great information to be continued.